This morning. In real life, Lord Gnome was Peter Cook, a quarter of Beyond the Fringe, half of Pete and Dud, and latterly as good an advertisement for non-smoking teetotalism as gas industry bosses are for social work. He would doubtless have been either bemused or scathing about the legions of now respectable people lining up to pay tribute to him today. That they did so is a mark of how far the satire boom which he helped to start has become the dominant humour among the educated British.
So all in all, I'd rather have been a judge than a miner. What's more, being a miner, as soon as you're too old and tired and sick and stupid to do your job properly, you have to retire. Well, the very opposite applies with judges.
The man who dared to say boo to the suffocating embrace of the British establishment might have become one of them, and maybe, unbelievable thought, now be an ambassador somewhere. Instead of the diplomatic service, he joined Jonathan Miller, Dudley Moore and Alan Bennett in Beyond the Fringe, a review that for the first time poked fun at things the British revered.
War's a psychological thing, Perkins, not like a game of football.
Yes, sir.
You know how in a game of football, 10 men often play better than 11?
Yes, sir.
Perkins, we're asking you to be that one man.
Sir.
Perkins,
Sir.
I want you to lay down your life.
Yes, sir.
We need a futile gesture at this stage. It'll raise the whole tone of the war. Get up in a crate, Perkins.
Sir.
Hop over to Bremen.
Yes, sir.
Take a shufti.
Sir.
Don't come back.
Right.
As the Profumo affair showed, the new satirists found they were attacking from the outside a ruling class and a style of government decaying from within. It was an ideal conjunction.
I don't think ever in my thinking was the idea that I would change society or anything like that. And I've always had a sort of almost schoolboy thing in me that I sort of enjoy getting up people's noses, you know, annoying people in a way.
Right, forget it. Put it in.
The satirical magazine Private Eye, which Cookie rescued from ruin in the early years, was this evening preparing its own tribute in characteristic style.
This time I think it is true to say that a comic genius has died. Often it's just wheeled out because it's something to fill up the papers and do a few reruns of old shows. But I think Peter was a genius from a very early age, and that he reached his peak also at a very early age. And everyone who came after him owed him some sort of debt.
There is something worse than the Laughing Cavalier, which my Auntie Muriel has. She has the bloody Mona Lisa in her toilet, yes. That's dreadful, that awful sniffy look about her, looking so superior, you know, peering down at you. She looks as if she'd never been to the lab in her life. You know?
I mean, that's the thing about the Laughing Cavalier. At least he has a giggle, doesn't he?
Peter Cook's satirical edge dulled earlier than his other comic talents. The double act with Dudley Moore brought him his greatest popularity.
He did what he wanted, you know, and to hell with anybody else. So he used to appear on Hampstead High Street in his slippers, and you know, he used to get the papers and stuff. And he didn't really sort of mind how he was interpreted as the years went by.
And then I looked behind the bush and I saw Wiggins, and he was being awfully naughty.
What was he doing?
He'd taken out his willy, and he was...
Dud and Pete's foul-mouthed alter egos, Derek and Clive, brought Cook a new audience in the 70s, as the boundaries he'd helped to push out extended ever wider.
I don't care.
Group 4 actually brought out a toy in the shape of a car thief, but when you open the package, it's missing.
In recent times, he'd seemed content to settle so often for the just about passable. But losing ambition did nothing to dull an ironic sense of his own importance, as when it was suggested he'd inspired a generation.
Well, this is no time for false modesty. I agree completely. In one fairly substantial area of comedy, I feel that in the same way in my time. In my view, Spike did it for a whole generation of comedy with a Goon Show.
You really do feel it about yourself?
Yes.
I was afraid for a moment you were teasing me again.
No, not teasing you at all.
With us now, Jonathan Miller and John Bird. What do you think was the secret of his humour, Jonathan Miller?
I think if anyone had known the secret of it, we could have repeated it. I think what was so distinctive about Peter was that it was completely inimitable. There were all sorts of ways in which he influenced a lot of us, but none of us ever succeeded in reproducing what in fact was completely original. And I think that in some ways it was almost a secret to him as well. He never told a funny story in his own voice. He could never, as it were, hold forth as himself. He was always taken over by a sort of ventriloquial seizure of some sort. Every single comic piece that he did was in the voice of someone else, and it was as if he was taken possession of by one or other of these completely mad characters.
How important or how influential was he, John Bird, do you think, in the development of satire?
Well, I don't know about satire. Yes, he was, I mean, incredibly influential because, for one thing, he set it up in many ways. He, with Jonathan involved in Beyond the Fringe and the Establishment Club he set up. But he wouldn't, he would jib at the word satire. I mean, I would say he's a satirist, but he would, but his view was not that of improving society. He had a tremendously strong bullshit detector, and for example, he actually liked political monsters because he thought at least they were upfront about it. The people he liked Harold Wilson and didn't like Harold Wilson because Harold Wilson was a hypocrite in his view. I remember him saying to me about at the time that Ferdinand Marcos was deposed, and Ferdinand Marcos was some kind of hero of Peter's because Marcos, was said, well, I'm a bastard, I'm going to, and they just found this mountain with Marcos's face, which they were going to carve in the mountain, and half of it was done. And then he was overthrown by Mrs. Aquino, who was this kind of liberal heroine with the tortured widow and the Democrat. And Peter wouldn't have any of it. He said, oh no, he said, you wait in 5 years' time, you'll find a mountain somewhere with Mrs. Aquino, big glasses sticking out of the thing. I mean, he really...
But there are still people who think he was kind of responsible for the culture of denigration, as it were, and they think that's been a malign influence.
No, I don't think that he was responsible for anything like that any more than I really believe, and I don't altogether agree with John that he was really responsible for the satire movement. I think that the satire idea was a journalist's fiction which was thrust into the hands of those of us who participated in that form of university-based comedy. But in Peter's case, the things that are memorable, the things that you've quoted on this screen, are these completely insane pieces of this man whose aunt had the Mona Lisa in the lavatory, turning up her nose at what was going on in the lavatory. I mean, that could scarcely be said to be a satirical jab at excretion.
No, but I mean, he would take what he'd do. He had this kind of microscope vision of I mean, he would see what seemed to make people tick. What he was keen on was obsessives, wasn't he?
Yes.
That people who put chaos and death and disorder to one side by obsessive interest in bees or small animal. I mean,
well, all the characters he created always produced this strange, preoccupied stare.
Yes.
He would fix himself on some distant point and then say, I'm writing a book on, I'm specialising, he would say, in the universe and everything that surrounds it. Now, that could scarcely be said to be satire. What it is, it's inspired, over-lubricated lunacy. I think that he actually has much more in common with the absurdist writers like N.F. Simpson, with whom I think he has a great deal in common. And I think that he was just fascinated by the way in which thought could be run loose.
But when he changed his style as the years went by, and we went through a particularly unhappy period, I suppose, in the sort of 70s, 80s, was that to do with the times changing or with him changing, or was it just the bottle or what?
I don't know what it was, and I don't know enough about his personal life to know why things changed. I think the thing about comedy and the why so many comedians are driven mad and driven to the bottle and driven to despair and suicide is that it's an extremely rare commodity, this laughing gas. You strike it sometimes like North Sea gas, and when it dries up, you have nothing else to fall back on, and there's nothing worse than drilling and finding that the drill is dry.
I mean, I remember seeing Peter when we were both still at university, and he had this character called E.L. Wisty, who specialised in the universe, and to some extent Peter's view of the world and Peter's comedy was formed then and never changed. And he was very honest about it and never gave way to political correctness or any other kind of correctness. I mean,
but it was a wonderfully mad thing. You see, for example, although, for example, his interview about the Great Train Robbery could be said superficially to be a satirical piece, it wasn't really. For example, when at one point Alan, interviewing him, says, I believe that your number one suspect is the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he says, yes, well, he's the person we're currently beating the living daylights out of down at the yard. And then he said, well, you use the identikit method, I gather. And he says, yes. And then he said, is he still your number one suspect? And he said, no, the Archbishop, God bless him, no longer resembles the picture that we had of him. Now, that's not about police brutality. It's about some wonderful joke about the fact that if someone ceases to resemble the picture that you've built of them, they're no longer suspect.
Yes,
now, that's a joke about thought.
But it also is about police brutality. I mean,
but I don't think Peter was in the slightest bit interested in police brutality, except as another piece of lunacy about which he could then have these sort of strange cadenzas.
Thank you both very much. He should certainly have been terribly bemused by all the tributes being paid to him today, I'm sure. And indeed, Peter Cook features on the front page of the Times tomorrow morning. A picture of him and Dudley Moore, of course, and top staff quit over sacking of Saatchi in the Times. New crisis at Saatchi in the Telegraph. Warburg to pull out of Eurobonds after losses. The Saatchi story again on the front page of the Financial Times. And the Sun has the news that the Princess of Wales has been renting a video of Moby Dick.